on a cold October morning along the St. Lawrence, billionaire Celeste Drummond stood on the stone steps of her lakefront estate, surrounded by lawyers and assistants and the particular silence of people waiting to be told what to do, and she laughed at the man in the oil-stained coveralls, kneeling beside her 1967 Jaguar E-Type. "Fix it," she said, loud enough for the group to hear, "and I'll let you name your price. Hell, fix it, and I'll marry you." Everyone laughed. The moment dissolved. Nobody gave it a second thought. Nobody except Nolan Wirth, because 40 seconds after lifting the bonnet of that Jaguar, he found something wedged behind the intake manifold that had no business being inside any engine, and the moment he understood what it was, the laughter on those stone steps stopped meaning anything at all. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story reaches. Hit like and stay until the end, because nothing here goes the way you think it does. The drive from Glen Burnie to the Drummond estate took Nolan 35 minutes on a normal day. This was not a normal day. Highway 2 was backed up past the Cataraqui Bridge because of construction that had been 2 weeks from finishing since July, and his truck, a 2006 Chevy Silverado, with rust blooming along the wheel wells and a passenger side mirror, held on with electrical tape and optimism, sat in the queue of vehicles the way a work boot sits beside a row of dress shoes. Functional. Conspicuous. He had the address on a scrap of receipt paper tucked under the sun visor. He didn't use his phone for directions, not out of principle. He'd just never gotten around to replacing the mount that broke off the dashboard 2 winters ago. And holding the phone while driving with Junie in the back seat wasn't something he was willing to do, so paper it was. He checked the address, turned off the highway where the road signs gave way to the kind of stone entrance pillars that didn't need signs, because if you belonged, you already knew where you were. The properties out here weren't houses. They were estates. Old money mixed with new money, mixed with money so established, it had stopped bothering to announce itself. The trees were enormous, the lawns were absurd, and everything had the manicured stillness of places where people paid other people to make sure nothing looked accidental. He found the gate. A camera swiveled toward him before he'd even slowed down. Name and appointment? Nolan Wirth. "I'm here about the Jaguar." A pause. The gate opened. The driveway curved through a canopy of maples that were deep into their autumn colors, reds and golds so vivid they looked deliberate, as though someone had art-directed the season. Nolan drove it slowly. He'd worked on expensive cars before. He'd spent 11 years as a drivetrain engineer at a Tier 1 supplier in Oshawa before Beth got sick, and after she died and everything rearranged itself the way everything does when the center of your life disappears. He'd taken over Frank Tessaro's shop in Glen Burnie and started rebuilding things with his hands instead of designing them on screens. Wealthy clients came with the territory. He knew the dynamics. He parked near the side entrance, where a woman in a charcoal blazer was already waiting. "Mr. Wirth? I'm Bridget. Miss Drummond is on the terrace. I'll walk you through." The house was stone and glass, old bones with modern renovation, the kind of place that had probably been someone's summer estate 100 years ago and was now someone's permanent declaration. They passed through a hallway lined with art that looked expensive in the way. Art looks expensive when you don't know enough to judge it, and out through French doors onto a flagstone terrace overlooking the river. Celeste Drummond was standing at the railing with a coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other. She was talking to 2 men, one in a suit, one in the kind of casual that costs more than a suit. She didn't look up when Nolan approached. He waited. After a moment, she glanced over. "You're the mechanic, Nolan Wirth. Your office called my shop. My assistant called your shop." She looked him over with the particular efficiency of someone accustomed to assessing things quickly. "Not unkind, practical. I've had 2 specialists drive up from Toronto. One flew in from a restoration outfit in Connecticut. Nobody can figure out what's wrong with it." "Where's the car?" She seemed faintly surprised that he didn't offer credentials. No resume, no pitch about his engineering background. "Carriage house. Bridget will show you." The carriage house had been converted into a climate-controlled garage that could have hosted a concourse. 5 bays, epoxy floors so clean you could eat off them, overhead lighting calibrated to gallery standards. 3 bays held modern vehicles. The 4th held something under a fitted gray cover whose shape Nolan recognized the way a musician recognizes a melody from 2 notes. Bridget pulled the cover back. The 1967 Jaguar E-Type Series 1 Roadster, British racing green, wire wheels, chrome that caught the overhead lights like liquid, sat there with the particular stillness of machines that have outlived several owners and remember all of them. Nolan set his bag on the workbench and walked around it once without touching anything. Bridget cleared her throat. "The Toronto specialist," said the fuel delivery. "I'll look first," Nolan said. "Then you can tell me what the others said." She left him alone. He started the way Frank had taught him. Exterior first. Panel gaps, shut lines, chrome condition. He ran his fingers along the bonnet seam, feeling for the slight irregularities that told stories about past repairs, past accidents, past attention. He checked the boot. Original carpet, original tool roll. He looked at the chassis plate and cross-referenced the stamped numbers on the body. They matched. Authentic car. Good. He moved to the engine bay, and when he opened the bonnet fully and leaned in with his inspection light, something in him went very still. The engine was correct externally. Correct carburetor setup, correct head, correct exhaust manifold. But nested behind the intake, hidden by what appeared to be a factory-original airbox that was in fact a meticulous reproduction, was a mechanical arrangement he had seen exactly once before in his life. A specific modification to the oil pressure relief circuit. A hand-machined bypass that rerouted coolant flow in a way that no service manual described and no factory had ever implemented. A particular philosophy of engine management that wasn't documented anywhere, because only one person had ever practiced it. Frank Tessaro. Nolan straightened up slowly and stared at the engine for a long time. Frank had been dead for 4 years. Heart attack in the shop on a Tuesday morning. Nolan had found him on the floor beside a Triumph TR6 with a socket wrench still in his hand. The ambulance had come, and then the coroner, and then the quiet that follows the sudden absence of someone who had been constant. Nolan had bought the shop from Frank's estate because nobody else wanted it, and because walking away from it felt like a second death. Frank had never mentioned working on a Jaguar E-Type for anyone named Drummond. And Frank had never, in all the years Nolan had known him, done work without documenting it in his meticulous shop logs, which Nolan still kept in the filing cabinet beside the compressor. So either Frank had done this work off the books, which was unlike him, or someone had moved this car through Frank's shop without Nolan knowing, which was impossible because Nolan had been there every day for the last 3 years of Frank's life. Unless it had happened before that, before Nolan, before Beth, before everything. He didn't say any of this when Bridget led him back to the terrace. He didn't say anything when Celeste Drummond looked up from her tablet with the expression of someone who expected to hear bad news and had already decided to be irritated by it. She was surrounded by more people now. One of them was a man Nolan hadn't seen before. Dark hair, late 40s, expensive watch, easy smile. The kind of smile that felt rehearsed if you paid attention, and Nolan always paid attention. "Well," Celeste said, "I can fix it." Mild surprise moved through the group. The man with the expensive watch spoke first. "The Toronto team said the entire fuel system needs." "The fuel system is fine," Nolan said. "The carburetors were rejetted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Whoever looked at it before me didn't recognize the configuration because it's not in any manual." He paused. "It's better than stock. The car isn't broken. It's been modified by someone exceptional, and the previous specialists didn't understand what they were looking at." Celeste studied him. "And you do?" "I know who did the work." "Who?" "A man named Frank Tessaro. He's dead. He was my teacher." The terrace went quiet. Celeste set her coffee down. "Your teacher. He taught me everything I know about engines. He ran the shop I own now. This is his work. I'd know it anywhere." The man with the watch shifted his weight. "That's a bold claim for someone who's been looking at the car for 20 minutes. Nolan looked at him. "What's your name?" "Adrian Hale. I manage Miss Drummond's automotive collection." "Then you should know, Mr. Hale, that what's inside that engine bay isn't just a repair. It's a signature. And right now I'm more interested in how it got there than in whether you believe me." Adrian smiled. The smile didn't go anywhere near his eyes. Celeste looked between the two men. "Fix the car, Mr. Wirth. Invoice Bridget. And if you learn anything about how your teacher's work ended up in my Jaguar, I'd like to know." Nolan drove home, thinking about Frank Tessaro standing in that shop in Glen Burnie, hands black with grease, explaining for the 100th time that an engine would tell you everything if you listened properly. Frank had been a quiet man. Methodical. Honest in the bone-deep way that made dishonesty not just wrong but structurally impossible, the way a building can't be built crooked if the foundation is level. So what was Frank's work doing inside a car owned by a woman he'd never mentioned, managed by a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes? He got home at 6. Junie was at the kitchen table with Mrs. Pelletier from next door, who watched her on days when Nolan's jobs ran long. There was a drawing in progress. Crayon. Ambitious. Something involving a whale and what appeared to be a castle, or possibly a very large sandwich. Nolan had learned not to guess. "Hey, Bug." Junie looked up. She was 6 years old and had Beth's eyes, and the particular seriousness of children who have lost a parent young enough to feel the absence without fully understanding its shape. "Dad, did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts?" "I did not," Mrs. Pelletier told me. 3 hearts. And blue blood. That's remarkable. I'm drawing one. Except I made it purple because blue looked wrong. Fair enough. He thanked Mrs. Pelletier, made dinner, which was spaghetti with sauce from a jar because he'd forgotten to defrost anything, and spaghetti was the emergency protocol. Junie ate half of hers, and then spent 10 minutes constructing an argument for why the remaining noodles constituted a full meal if you accounted for the bread she'd had as a snack, which was technically carbs, and pasta was also carbs, so really she'd eaten double. It was a better argument than it should have been. After she was in bed, Nolan went to the shop. The filing cabinet beside the compressor held 30 years of Frank's records. Every car, every job, every part ordered, every hour billed. Nolan had gone through some of it when he took over, enough to understand the business. He'd never gone through all of it. He started pulling files. It took 2 hours, but he found it. A folder labeled simply Hail Private. Inside, a single invoice, dated 1998. For work performed on a 1967 Jaguar E-Type Series 1, chassis number matching the car in Celeste Drummond's carriage house. The client listed was not Celeste Drummond. It was Drummond Consolidated Holdings, and the authorized representative who signed for the work was Adrian Hale. Attached to the invoice, in Frank's small, precise handwriting, was a note on lined paper. Car is clean, work is genuine, but the provenance documents they gave me don't match. Numbers have been altered. I've documented the discrepancies on the enclosed sheet and placed a copy inside the car itself, behind the intake, where it will be found by someone who knows where to look. If you're reading this, you're that someone. Please make sure Miss Drummond sees the enclosed. FT. The enclosed sheet was a detailed comparison of the car's actual history and the falsified provenance that had been used to acquire it. Frank had cross-referenced VIN stampings, factory build records he'd obtained from the Jaguar Heritage Trust in Coventry, and auction records from Bonhams. The discrepancies were clear, methodical, devastating. Someone had manufactured a false ownership history to inflate the car's value by several $100,000, and Adrian Hale's name was on every relevant document. Nolan sat in the shop with the folder open on the workbench and the overhead fluorescent buzzing the way it always buzzed. The sound of the room he'd inherited from a dead man who had, it turned out, hidden a bomb inside a Jaguar and waited 26 years for the right person to find it. He called Celeste Drummond's office the next morning. Bridget answered. Nolan asked to speak with Miss Drummond directly. Bridget said that wasn't how it worked. Nolan said he understood, and that what he'd found inside her Jaguar was going to require a conversation that didn't go through an assistant. There was a pause. Bridget put him through. Celeste listened without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a long time. "Bring me the documents," she said. He drove out to the estate that afternoon. Junie was in the back seat because Mrs. Pelletier had a dentist appointment and there was no one else. He considered this for about 10 seconds and then decided that Junie had been to worse places than a billionaire's house and would probably handle it with more composure than he would. Celeste met them in a study on the ground floor. Books, leather chairs, a desk the size of a small country. She looked at Junie. "Who's this?" "My daughter, Junie." "Hello, Junie." Junie regarded her with the frank evaluation she applied to all new adults. "Hello, your house is very big. Do you get lost?" Celeste almost smiled. "Sometimes. You should draw a map. Maps help. I'll consider that." Nolan laid the folder on the desk and walked her through it. The invoice. Frank's note, the provenance comparison. The falsified auction records. He watched her face change as she read, not dramatically, not with the theatrical shock of someone performing surprise, but with the slow controlled recalibration of someone who was beginning to understand that a person she trusted had been stealing from her in a way so patient and so precise that it had taken a dead mechanic's hidden evidence to reveal it. She set the papers down. Adrian has managed my collection for 14 years. I know. He sources the vehicles. He handles the provenance verification. He manages the insurance valuations, which means he controls the entire chain. She looked at him. You're saying he's been inflating values. I'm saying Frank Tessaro believed he was, and Frank was the most careful man I've ever known. He didn't write that note lightly. Celeste stood and walked to the window. The St. Lawrence was steel gray under a November sky. A freighter was moving slowly upriver toward Kingston, carrying whatever freighters carry, indifferent to the things happening in rooms along the shore. I need a lawyer, she said. That's not something I can help with. I know, she turned back, but I need someone who understands what's inside that car, what Frank did, why the modifications matter as proof that he worked on it and therefore that his documentation is credible. She paused. I need you, Mr. Wirth. Junie, who had been examining the books on the lowest shelf with proprietary interest, looked up. My dad is very good at fixing things, she said. He fixed our dishwasher and also my bike, and also he makes okay spaghetti. Okay spaghetti, Celeste repeated. It's from a jar. But the noodles are usually right. Nolan looked at his daughter with the particular expression of a parent whose child has just summarized his entire life with devastating accuracy. Things moved quickly after that, and also slowly because legal processes exist in their own time, indifferent to urgency. Celeste retained a forensic accounting firm from Toronto. She retained a lawyer named Miriam Okafor, who worked out of an office on Princess Street in Kingston and had the calm, deliberate manner of someone who had spent 20 years unraveling things other people had spent 20 years building. Nolan met with Miriam twice. She asked precise questions. She understood the significance of Frank's modifications as physical evidence and the documentation as corroboration. She told Nolan his testimony would matter. Weeks passed. Normal life continued, because it does. A 72 MGB came into the shop needing a full electrical rewire, which was the automotive equivalent of untangling Christmas lights the size of a building. A retired professor from Queens brought in a Volvo 240 he'd owned since 1989 and wanted maintained indefinitely. Nolan liked the professor and liked the Volvo, and spent a morning going over it with the attention you'd give anything that had been cared for faithfully and deserved the same in return. Junie lost her first molar and spent approximately 48 hours showing the gap to anyone within range, including the cashier at the Shoppers Drug Mart, who had not asked but was gracious about it. She started a new drawing project, a series of portraits of neighborhood cats, rendered in crayon with a commitment to color accuracy that was, if Nolan was honest, better than his own ability to distinguish between similar shades of orange. He heard nothing from Celeste. He hadn't expected to. She had professionals handling things now. She didn't need a mechanic from Glen Burnie for what came next. He'd been useful for a specific thing at a specific time. That was fine. That was how most jobs ended. He told himself that several times. Then on a Wednesday evening in late November, while he was helping Junie with a math worksheet that involved fractions she found personally offensive, his phone buzzed with a text from an unsaved number. Miriam's forensic team found everything. 14 cars. 14 falsified provenances. The total inflation is over $4 million. It's enough. See, he read it twice, then typed, "Good." He stared at the screen, then added, "How are you?" The reply came 4 minutes later. Honestly, I don't know yet. Still working that out. He put the phone down and went back to fractions. Still working that out. He understood that answer completely. Adrian Hale's name first appeared in print in a small item in the Globe and Mail's business section. A brief mention of an RCMP investigation into art and automotive fraud connected to a private collection in eastern Ontario. No names in the headline. Nolan found it by accident, scrolling on his phone while waiting for Junie's swimming lesson to end at the YMCA. He read it standing in the chlorine-smelling lobby with a vending machine humming beside him, and a poster about youth swim night peeling off the wall, and the mundane normalcy of his surroundings made the information feel faintly surreal. Junie came out 11 minutes later with wet hair and the announcement that she had floated on her back for 7 seconds, which she considered a personal best. "That's great, June." My instructor said, My form was excellent. High praise. I know. She took his hand as they walked out. Dad, can we get hot chocolate? They got hot chocolate. It was Celeste who called him, not a text, an actual phone call. On a Saturday morning, when Nolan was under a Honda Civic doing an oil change and had to slide out and wipe his hands to answer. I want to show you something, she said. At the house. Can you come this afternoon? He could. Mrs. Pelletier took Junie. He drove out to the estate alone. Celeste was waiting in the carriage house. The Jaguar was there, cover off, gleaming under the lights. Beside it, on the workbench, was a box he hadn't seen before. She opened it. Inside were Frank Tessaro's tools. Not shop tools, not the wrenches and ratchets you'd find in any garage. These were Frank's personal instruments. The hand-machined feeler gauges he'd made himself. The custom valve adjustment tools. The set of precision micrometers in the fitted wooden case that Frank had carried from Italy when he emigrated in 1971. Nolan looked at them and felt something shift in his chest. Where did you get these? Adrian had them. In a storage unit in Brockville that Miriam's team found during the asset search. Along with documentation from 6 other mechanics and restorers he'd hired over the years, he kept records of everything. The tools, I'm told, have no evidentiary value. They're personal effects. She paused. They should be yours. Nolan picked up one of the feeler gauges. The steel was worn smooth at the grip point from decades of use. He could see Frank's hands holding it, the careful way he positioned his fingers, the patience. Thank you, he said. Celeste leaned against the workbench. Miriam tells me Adrian is going to face charges. Federal, fraud, forgery, theft over $5,000. The RCMP file is substantial. Good. She also tells me I should have caught it. That the signs were there. Nolan looked at her. Were they? Probably. I trusted him. He'd been with the collection since my father started it. He knew every car. He knew every number. I didn't question things because questioning him felt like questioning my father's judgment, and my father's judgment was the one thing I never wanted to examine too closely. She was quiet for a moment. He died 3 years ago, my father. And Adrian stepped into that space, and I let him because it was easier than admitting the space existed. Nolan understood that. The space left by a death. The way you fill it with whatever's closest because the emptiness is worse than the wrong thing. Frank left that evidence because he trusted that someone would eventually find it, Nolan said. He didn't try to be a hero. He didn't confront anyone. He just did careful work and left the truth where it could be found by the right person at the right time. And you were that person. I was the one who knew where to look. She looked at the Jaguar. I want you to finish the restoration. Properly. The way Frank would have. That's a significant job. I know. And I want it done right, not fast. Right. He considered it. He thought about the shop in Glen Burnie, the filing cabinet, the fluorescent light that buzzed, the familiar dimensions of a life that was small and careful in his. Okay, he said. Over the following weeks, Nolan drove out to the estate twice a week to work on the Jaguar. Sometimes Junie came. Celeste, who had expected to be mildly inconvenienced by the presence of a 6-year-old in her carriage house, discovered instead that Junie was excellent company. She asked questions that were either profound or bizarre, with very little middle ground, and she drew constantly. Filling pages of a sketchbook Celeste had given her with detailed portraits of the Jaguar from every angle, each one labeled in careful printing. Jag from the back, and Jag wheel, close up, and once Jag engine. This part is complicated. The restoration took 3 months. Nolan documented everything the way Frank had taught him. Photograph first, note second, touch third. Every component removed, cataloged, assessed, restored, or replaced with period-correct parts sourced from specialists in the UK. He found Frank's fingerprints everywhere inside the car, not literally, but in the decisions, the routing of a wire, the choice of a fastener, the angle of a bracket. A conversation across decades between a dead man and the student he'd left behind to finish the work. Celeste visited the carriage house most days when Nolan was working. She asked questions, good ones. Not about how long things took or how much they cost, but about why. Why that approach to the valve clearance? Why that sequence for the reassembly? Why Frank's method differed from the factory procedure? Nolan answered the way Frank had answered him, carefully and completely, because the questions deserved it. He told her about Beth, not all at once, not in a single confession, but in the way real stories emerge, piece by piece over weeks of shared work and quiet afternoons in a garage where the only sounds were tools and the occasional murmur of Junie narrating her drawings to herself. Beth had been a nurse at Kingston General. They'd married young. Junie came, and then 18 months later the diagnosis, pancreatic, fast. Beth had died on a Tuesday in March, and Nolan's had stood in the hospital parking lot afterward and looked at the sky and the cars and the other people walking in and out of the building and felt the absolute ordinary indifference of a world that had just changed completely and hadn't noticed. He'd left engineering. He couldn't sit in meetings about torque specifications while his daughter learned to walk in someone else's living room. He bought Frank's shop because it let him work with his hands and be home by 5:30, and because the smell of motor oil and old concrete was honest in a way that office towers weren't. Celeste told him about her father. About inheriting a company at 29 and spending the next decade proving she belonged at the head of it. About trust and how it calcifies into assumption, and how someone like Adrian could build an entire architecture of fraud inside the spaces where you've stopped looking because looking felt like doubt. You can't blame yourself for trusting someone, Nolan said. They were in the carriage house. It was late afternoon. Junie was asleep on a bench with her sketchbook open on her chest, which was where sketchbooks went to die in their household. I can blame myself for not verifying, Celeste said. Maybe. But the mistake doesn't erase the good work, and the good work doesn't excuse the mistake. He paused. You hold both. You try to be better because of both. She looked at him. Frank taught you that? No, he said. That one I figured out on my own. The trial preparation stretched into the new year. Nolan testified at a preliminary hearing in Kingston in February. Miriam walked him through his evidence methodically. The modification, the hidden note, the provenance discrepancies. Adrian Hale's lawyer tried to challenge his expertise. Nolan answered each question the way he approached an engine, one component at a time, checking each connection before moving to the next. The judge found the evidence compelling. Adrian was charged on 7 counts. Spring came. The Jaguar was finished. Nolan closed the bonnet for the last time and stepped back. The car sat in the carriage house bay, green and perfect and whole, carrying inside it the work of 2 men separated by 26 years and connected by a philosophy neither of them had ever needed to put into words because the work itself was the statement. Celeste arrived to see it and stood quietly for a moment. It's beautiful, she said. It was always beautiful. It just needed someone to understand what it was trying to be. She looked at him. Frank wrote something, didn't he? In one of those shop manuals you keep. Nolan was surprised. He'd mentioned the manuals once, in passing. She'd remembered. In the margin of a Jaguar service bulletin. Pencil. His handwriting. What did it say? Nolan recited it from memory, the way you recite things that have been sitting inside you for years, waiting to mean what they mean. The job isn't to fix what's broken. The job is to understand the thing well enough that it shows you what it was always supposed to be. Celeste was quiet. He was talking about engines, Nolan said. Was he? That evening, the 3 of them ate dinner in the main house. Celeste had cooked, which surprised Nolan, and the meal was slightly chaotic, because Junie had opinions about table settings that were strongly held and architecturally ambitious, and Celeste had produced cloth napkins that Junie immediately began folding into shapes she described as swans, but which more closely resembled crumpled hats, which was fine. After dinner, Junie fell asleep on the sofa with her sketchbook open to a drawing of the Jaguar that was, Nolan noticed, genuinely good. Not 6-year-old good. Actually good. The proportions were right. The curves were confident. She'd captured something. Nolan and Celeste sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the quiet of a large house settling into evening. I've been thinking, Celeste said, about what happens next, with the collection, with all of it. I don't want another Adrian. I don't want someone managing it at a distance. I want someone who understands what these cars are. Nolan looked at her. I'm not offering you a job, she said. I'm describing a problem and seeing if you hear a solution in it. He almost smiled. That's definitely offering me a job. It's offering you a conversation about a job. My shop would still be yours. Glen Burnie is 35 minutes away. The collection needs attention, not a full-time presence. He thought about it. He thought about Frank's shop, the filing cabinet, the buzzing fluorescent, the small, honest dimensions of the life he'd built. He thought about what Frank would say, which was probably nothing. because Frank expressed approval through silence and disapproval through a single raised eyebrow that communicated more than most people's speeches. "Okay," he said. "Let's have that conversation." She looked at him with the directness he'd come to rely on, the quality that didn't let you hide behind incomplete answers. "Okay," she said. He believed her. She believed him. Outside, the saint, Lawrence moved past in the darkness, carrying whatever it carried, headed wherever it was going. The last of the winter ice had broken up weeks ago, and the river was open and black and patient in the way that rivers are patient, holding everything that passes through them without holding on. Junie murmured in her sleep. The sketchbook slid half an inch toward the floor. Neither of them moved to catch it. They just sat with the coffee and the quiet and the comfortable weight of where they were. Not at a beginning, not at an end, somewhere in the honest middle of things, which was where most of real life actually happened. Nolan thought about what Frank had written in that margin. The line he'd carried for years without knowing he was carrying it. The line that had been waiting, patient as a river, to mean what it finally meant. He looked at Junie, asleep on the sofa, Tessaro. He looked at Celeste, across the table. He thought about a Jaguar that had held a dead man's truth inside its engine for 26 years, because Frank had believed that someone would come along who knew what they were looking at. He thought about Beth, who had loved him completely and been loved completely in return, and whose absence had shaped him into someone different, not better or worse, just changed, carrying her in the change. He thought about a shop in Glen Burnie that would still be there tomorrow, and a collection of cars in a carriage house that each had a story embedded in their engineering that he was going to spend the coming months patiently reading. He didn't say any of this out loud. He didn't need to. Some things were complete in themselves, in the sitting, in the quiet, in the particular warmth of a kitchen in a house that was not yet home but was beginning, tentatively and imperfectly, to feel like it might become one. He picked up the sketchbook before it fell. He set it on the table, open to the page Junie had reached. Outside, somewhere along the dark river, something was making its way downstream, unhurried, following whatever current it had been given. Everything else could wait until morning.